Adyashanti writes that the reality that certain thoughts and thought patterns recur after awakening comes as a bit of a disappointment to many people. They may have believed that if they had a true awakening, they would never again believe thoughts that cause them to suffer. But this isn't necessarily true. It is true that the more spiritual awakening matures in us, the more we see through. And as a result, there is less and less tendency to get caught by thought. Adyashanti says that, I remember someone asking one of my favorite Indian sages, Nisargadatta Maharaj, whether the egoic personality ever arose in him. He said very casually, "Of course it does, but I see at once that it is illusion, and I discard it." Someone like Maharaj, someone very mature in his spiritual awakening, can operate like that. But most people don't start out that way, not even after a very profound awakening. In fact, it's not at all uncommon for some of the deepest and most contracted thought patterns to arise just after awakening. This sometimes comes as a surprise to people. Part of what happens when we awaken is that the top gets ripped off of our ability to suppress, and we find it very hard to hold anything at bay. In the aftermath of an awakening, some very powerful thought forms may arise, things we push down very deeply, that we try to keep unconscious. But now everything starts to come to the light of being. At these times, what's important is to avoid what I call spiritual bypassing, dismissing the thought, ignoring the fact that we get caught in a moment of re-identification. We often use non-dual language to this end. We tell ourselves, "Oh, that's just identification. It doesn't matter. Since there's nobody to do anything anyway, everything's happening spontaneously after all." This is a subtle yet effective way of hiding from our own experience. It allows us to avoid dealing with our continuing tendency to re-identify. What is important is to have the willingness to look at these moments of identification clearly and honestly. There are many ways to engage in self-inquiry. Adyashanti writes that he found writing to be helpful to me, both before awakening and for a certain period afterwards. If I noticed myself slipping back into identification, I would go to a coffee shop with a pad of paper and pencil and would start to write about it. I would define exactly which thought or belief had caught me and what the inner world view of that thought was. For example, if we do something that makes us feel silly or embarrassed, our mind might have the thought, "I shouldn't have done that," or "that was stupid of me." If you take a thought that small and you start to really open it, you'll see right away that that thought and feeling are linked to one another. One is actually the doorway into the other. The thought, "I shouldn't have done that," comes with a feeling, perhaps embarrassment or anger. And in this way, we see the inner world view of the thought and how it pulls us into identification. Very often, we find that the beliefs and ideas contained in our thinking and feeling come from our childhood. It may originate from a very early memory of being embarrassed, or put down, or shamed, or terrified, or angered, or saddened. If we start to investigate in a meditative way, where body and mind are linked, our inquiry can start to uncover these deep inner experiences. You can't just think about it. You can't just say, "This is a thought, I know it's not true," and be done with it. Adyashanti writes that I would sometimes spend hours in the coffee shop, refusing to leave until I had gotten to the bottom of a single thought pattern. The more awake we become, the more that re-identification hurts. It's like being pulled forcibly out of heaven back into hell. And when you feel like you're in hell, you'll do anything you can to release yourself. So I would apply this inquiry process with great diligence. I would stick with it until I saw all the way through a moment of identification. I would know that I had gotten there when it completely released from my system. I had to revisit certain patterns of thinking, feeling, and reaction on several different occasions. Each time, the process of insight would go deeper, revealing more and more. As it did, I would get down to the core beliefs, thoughts, and feelings. What was required was a willingness to stick with the inquiry so that the illusion could be pulled up by its roots. Ultimately, what's important is to go to the heart of the thinking and feeling process. Only then can we find the illusory beliefs that are creating pain in the present moment. When we sincerely inquire into these belief patterns, we find that they are no longer useful strategies. Though they may have helped us cope with difficult situations in the past, they have often outworn their usefulness. The key is to face and investigate whatever belief structures underlie your emotions. In that moment, inquiry is your spiritual practice. To avoid this practice is to avoid your own awakening. Anything you avoid in life will come back over and over again until you're willing to face it, to look deeply into its true nature. When we see that our thoughts, judgments, and opinions are just as true as their opposites, the polarities of our thought become balanced. Only when thought is balanced in this way does the dualistic structure of thinking lose its validity and start to collapse. This is not something that we see only once. It is something that we see any and every time it is necessary to see it. There is no such thing as past awakening. Past awakening is past. The only thing that is relevant is the present. Am I awake to the truth right now? And not only in my mind, but in the entirety of my being? Do I actually see that the entire structure of a personal worldview and a personal self is nothing but a dream in the universal mind? This is all that is relevant. This willingness not to bypass illusion is very important. Adyashanti writes, "My teacher told me that we come to Nirvana by way of Samsara. We come to the truth, to freedom, by way of bondage. We come to see the true nature of things by seeing through the illusory nature of things. We don't come to Nirvana by avoiding Samsara. We don't come to heaven by avoiding hell or trying to sidestep it. The truth is quite the opposite. Our illusions, the beliefs we hold on to, are the very doorways to our freedom. We simply have to enter through them without grasping or pushing away. We must not believe them, but we must not run from them either. We need to see each moment of apparent bondage as an invitation to freedom. Then it becomes an act of love, an act of compassion to stop running away. Each moment is the moment that needs to be happening. Each experience we have is the divine invitation. The texture and flow of our lives, from moment to moment, is itself what reveals freedom. I can't possibly emphasize this more. Life itself shows us what we need to see in order to become free. So it's necessary that we don't run from life, that we actually face what's happening in an honest and sustained way. When we do this, we come to see that we truly do come to Nirvana by way of Samsara. This doesn't mean that we stay stuck in Samsara. Instead, we unhook ourselves from it. We unvelcro our samsaric and illusory thoughts, and by doing so, we end up in Nirvana. Awakening reveals our already perfect inherent freedom. It also becomes the groundwork from which we develop the wherewithal, the clarity and courage to look into anything that may have the power to hook us into pain and identification. Over time, this seeing and releasing becomes natural. It becomes spontaneous. At the beginning, it may be somewhat tedious. It may take quite a bit of time and intention, maybe even some real effort and discipline. As time goes on, however, it becomes more and more natural, more and more spontaneous. At a certain point, the seeing and releasing becomes so internalized that it's almost automatic. A thought arises, and there may be an instant of identification. Inquiry meets the thought, and it opens itself to freedom. Once this inward releasing is deeply internalized, the whole process can take a split second. That's the way awakening moves. At times, we don't even know it's happening, but it is happening. Awareness is freeing itself over and over and over. And as I've said, the key is sincerity. It's the willingness to meet sincerely and honestly what is happening in our body and mind. That is always the doorway to freedom. A freedom that only happens now, and now, and now, and now.